Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be discussing Doug Wilson and the bad marriage advice that he gives, putting it lightly, and the promotion of wifely rebellion that he's definitely insinuated in his final days of No Quarter November. This has been the worst No Quarter November ever, and it's been a disaster for Canon Press, for Doug Wilson's reputation and ministry. And this is how he kind of caps it off by insinuating that wives should rebel against their husbands for noticing. So that's what we're going to dive into today. But first, I want you to know Evangelical Dark Web is a Christian news gathering and commentary ministry. You can support our work over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. This is our Patreon-like system. We also have a free newsletter. But if you want bonus content, that's how you can get it, is the Patreon-like system. We also have a book, Winning Not Winsome, 10 Commandments of Spiritual Warfare, available on Amazon. You should check it out. That's linked in the description below also as well. But the least you can do is like this video, subscribe to the channel, to the podcast if you are new. So the context of this is a lot. I don't fully want to get into the whole Tobias Reimenschneider thing. I've written an article about that. And I'll probably do a live stream on Woke Wars 2 and where it stands this week. But for now, suffice to say that Doug Wilson is going after his own base, his own audience. And it's one of the worst things you can do is declare war on your own audience. And that's what I believe Doug Wilson has done. And it comes at a time when his star is rising in prominence in Conservative Inc., for instance. He was on Tucker Carlson. He's been speaking at NatCon. So Doug Wilson's star is shining very bright, and to me, he does not want to lose that star. And so he's come out with the Woke Antioch Declaration, which does follow up some woke activities he's been doing in Creek, really trying to go woke for Jews in a way that he would not go woke for black people. And it's just all the parallels of Woke Wars 1 to Woke Wars 2. You know, you just replace black with Jew, and you got a lot of the same issues just rehashing themselves. So that's definitely what's going on here. And the context for this bad marriage advice is grounded in a discussion of so-called anti-Semitism. It's grounded in a discussion of noticing patterns and behaviors of Jewish individuals. And they talk at length about, how Jewish people run a certain industry, and then, who's morally culpable for not being the master of their domain when it comes to pornography and stuff like that. So that's where we're picking up in the discussion of this clip. And this clip is just really bad. It's just really bad advice. And the exegesis that Doug Wilson does with the comparison to Abigail and is just absolutely abysmal. So here's the clip.
It came as a real surprise to me that I'm getting to live through a time where people are openly anti-Semitic in a way that I would have thought that Christians, that it's self-identifying. Because one of the things that really blows my mind about that is that it actually doesn't matter at all who we're talking about. No, you're not behaving like a Christian.
You're not behaving like Christ at all.
These are things
you would spank your 7-year-old.
No, but it's like, but the hatred, the anger, the bitterness, it's like, well, so they're the worst, even if it was true.
Yeah,
you're in sin.
Let's say
again, this is just a nonsensical premise. I believe this. So this is Doug's children, I believe, that are on set with him, and you got the whole Mr. Rogers aesthetic that he's going for, which seemingly was his theme for No Quarter November. I didn't pay attention to No Quarter November. I have covered the antics of Doug Wilson this month, and I think what he's been doing has been disgraceful and trying to. He's been trying to destroy Joel Webbon's ministry, and that to me is disgraceful. I view it as, Joel Webbon has more subs than Canon Press, so now he's a threat. That's kind of how I view that. But anyway, they're talking about noticing, and if you look at the Christian heritage of noticing Jewish patterns and behaviors, really, you're going to say it's unchristian, like Martin Luther, John Chrysostom, Justin Martyr. You're going to say that they were acting unchristian? Like, come on, get real. Learn history.
you persuaded me that the Jews are your enemy. Well, Jesus said to love your enemy.
and pray for them. So you should be leading prayer meetings
Pray
for
for
the
those who
Jews.
mistreat
And then
you.
you're like, no, that would make people think I was a
Yeah, even if
Zionist,
there's a whole
which
bunch
is
of
the
ifs
worst
and
of the other.
there's a whole bunch of ifs you have to stipulate, and they're still doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but it
even-
just but the thing that I really meant is that what surprised me is that God put a few new ingredients in the pot, and all kinds of things are coming out that
I
we didn't
think
know.
Yeah.
This is I know we already said we're going to wrap up. We probably have to at this point, but the one of the things that's funny to me about recent history, really, really recently, is I think that in COVID, the secular power structure put into the imaginations of people this destabilizing narrative that they hadn't really conceived
And you
recently.
can't trust anything.
That we can't trust anything, but also we can chop down very old trees and kick over walls that have been there a long time because we just canceled a bunch of stuff that nobody ever thought would be canceled.
Yeah, seemed
Things that were
uncancelable.
uncancelable were canceled. And then we were like, and now as you were, everybody go back to how you were. And people are sitting there with this new imagining that's going on. And then Trump gets elected and he's saying things like, no more Department of Education. We can throw out income tax, and everybody's like, yay. The chaos, the actual, like the rocking of the boat, the chop of the water that would happen if he does a third of what he's saying he'll do, or 25%, will be a pretty significant destabilizing, restabilizing, it'll be
Will that
a
make
convection,
everybody
congealing
forget
moment.
about this particular hobby horse, or will it make it worse?
If there's an economic boom, then I think a lot of people are going to abandon this as not the future. This is basically, I'll just cite Joe Rogan.
Sure.
Okay. Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Things are
Because anything goes these days.
Anything goes. Joe Rogan said, and I think this is right, when civilizations are falling apart, people start blaming the Jews.
Yeah.
And
It's part of the life cycle.
it's part of the life cycle. Now, that's not a defense of, if you're
That's historically inaccurate. Just, Rome was not falling apart when they had certain activities that could be construed as blaming the Jews. Just saying, that's just historically inaccurate. We could also look at Spain, the Reconstruction, or Reconquista, my bad, not Reconstruction. That's American history. And there's a number of other examples to point out, but I think Rome's a pretty big example because they were a pretty big empire. I mean, kind of a big deal. Spain during their height. Big examples here that are definitely counter to the point that they are raising. So that's just a nonsensical point that they're trying to make. Now, there is something to be said that Jews rise to power during the end of a empire's cycle. Like that, there is some truth to that. And the Biden administration was, in fact, quite Jewish. And the Trump cabinet appointees, not very Jewish by comparison. Just saying. You ever notice these things?
running to your keyboard to write me this, but.
Founder of OnlyFans.
I know.
Why
I know.
are you researching
I
the
know
founder
that.
of OnlyFans?
How many
My
white people
question.
are on OnlyFans?
Yeah. So basically,
So I do got to question who actually is, there's a lot of ethos that we hear about getting famous, making ridiculous amounts of money. I'm not really convinced that it's, the white Americans that are subsidizing this industry. I really think it's foreigners. Just by the sheer dollar amounts and the quantities. No one's ever talking about that. I saw a story once. It was this ethot, and she has a kid, and she was complaining about the kid having to pick up her throwing up kid at school. And she was complaining about that and how maybe she didn't wear pants while driving and stuff like that. She was complaining about that too. But having to pick up your kid from midday, which was peak hours for her, why is 11 o'clock peak hours if you're on OnlyFans and stuff like that? It's because it's prime time in the Middle East and India. So there is something that I think, because people from all over the world can get on the OF app, that it is not really Americans that are subsidizing this industry as much as people think. Now, I haven't done a full deep dive into the data, but I think they're making assumptions because I think Americans are a little cheap when it comes to this stuff. But I think people in India and the Middle East, they don't care as much about throwing dollars on this. My opinion. Let me know what you think about that. But try to not get your comment deleted by YouTube.
what it boils down to is you're a Christian. You don't get to hate. You don't get to hate people.
Right. Right.
It should be that simple.
Well, it should be. And that's the thing that is quite striking about all of this is it's just a lot of naughty behavior.
Yeah, it is. But I think it is that just everything's seething. Everything's seething.
I have a question.
There's convection, there's congealing, there's convection, there's congealing, and we just convected. We're about to convect a lot more, I think, for the next.
So she's about to shift the subject to where we're really going to talk about the marriage part. But the idea of Christians not supposed to be hating anyone. There's two types of hatreds, and this is going to come up in the Bible lesson that we're going to do for today about Abigail, who's about to come up. But there's private and, there's a private revenge, private hatred. And that's largely what Jesus is condemning. It's not about, hating what God hates. We are supposed to have hatred, a perfect, righteous hatred as Christians. That is different than a private hatred, a private grudge, taking private revenge. Vengeance belongs to the Lord. So that's something to keep in mind as we're about to discuss the marriage question.
I do have a question, though, that is really ties in many of the things we talked about. It would be a pastoral question. What would you say to a woman who's married to a man who is going this way? Because it's something that I know of more than one circumstance of a woman who seems to be walking with the Lord, seems to be trying to do her duty, and her husband is going off the deep end. What is the...
I've said...
So what is the deep end? In the context of the discussion, it is noticing. It is viewing Jews as a larger threat to Christianity and than other false religions. That is the behavior that's being called going off the deep end. It is, denying the Antioch Declaration. That is the behavior that's being labeled and condemned here.
A number of times over the years, and this would be another occasion to say it again, is that in a world where some men can go the Nabal route, I have wished for more Abigails.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, how would you tell a woman to be an Abigail?
I would say, tell them to say to their husband, honey, wherever you're going, I'm not. Okay? I'm not going there. And if you don't stop going there, I'm setting up a flare. We're talking to the elders. We're not going to go off silently, sadly into the night.
Would you say that she should refuse to move? Like if he's so say
he tries to flee accountability,
right? Say things they're already leaving. He wants to leave the church. He wants to move. She doesn't have grounds for divorce in the sense that he's not been unfaithful to her, but he wants to move them to a place where she knows she'd have no Is that what you mean being Abigail? Say I'm.
Well, I think the Abigail thing. I always think it's the coolest thing that.
So again, this is wholly unbiblical advice. This is very unbiblical. First of all, noticing, and I would argue anti-Semitism are not sins. Those are liberal. Anti-Semitism is a liberal buzzword, and it usually has always been a liberal buzzword. So, because it's defined by what the ADL says it is, it's not a sin. And I don't think there's a biblical conception for a dislike of a false religion or a culture. I mean, look what Christians wrote about the Tartars, about the Turks and stuff like that. I mean, come on. It wasn't sinful then. What Paul wrote about the Cretans wasn't sinful, especially since it's in Holy Scripture. It wasn't sinful. So they need to stop it. It's not grounds for encouraging rebellion against a wife. It doesn't make someone noticing doesn't make them Nabal, who's described as a worthless man in Scripture. That is not the threshold of being a worthless man. I mean, Henry Ford was far from a worthless man.
She saved both men in that. She saved Nabal from getting killed by David, but she saved David from killing Nabal. Yeah. And so she went behind Nabal's back, who was her current husband, but she also stopped her future husband from doing something that was going to be wicked. Yeah. And the way she confronted him, so she went behind Nabal's back, but she also went very respectfully to David, but said, don't do this thing that you're planning to do.
Yeah.
Right. So we need more.
So let me just give a brief overview of the story that's being referenced. Nabal spurns David. So David's out in the wilderness. They're kind of foraging. I guess they're pretty hungry. So tensions are running a little high at the moment. So they request Nabal. They try to ingratiate themselves with Nabal in the Mount Carmel area. And Nabal spurns David's people and is quite rude about it. So David is plotting to kill Nabal and, pillage, I guess. Abigail pays tribute to David and thus prevents David from sinning by taking private revenge. So David was about to sin by taking private revenge against Nabal. But then God smote Nabal, so Nabal gets smote, as vengeance belongs to the Lord. So that's a key lesson in this story. Vengeance belongs to God. It does not belong to us. We are not to be taking out private vengeance, and this would be an extrajudicial private vengeance. We're not to be doing that. We're not to be doing that. And then God provided the vengeance because Nabal dies. And then Doug Wilson is about to argue that somehow undermining a noticing husband makes you an Abigail. It's just bad exegesis because that would make them the David in the situation. And you know what David does at the end of the story? He marries the wife. Like, no, you're not David. You're not Abigail. And your husband's not Nabal.
Basically, in dire situations with Nabals, we need Abigails. Now, at the same time, I'm saying that in a generation where many, many wives have never thought of obeying their husbands ever.
Right.
And she shouldn't.
But it seems like they all think to do it when they shouldn't.
Yeah.
In the time when they ought to say,
No.
absolutely not.
Well, it's
go
embarrassing.
along,
It's
yeah.
actually, it's
Right,
not,
but
but
if
it's embarrassing
he
to them
says,
as
let's
well.
eat
It's
more
not just
homemade
embarrassing.
meals, she might feel free to say absolutely not, but not
Yeah.
when it comes to
But so what you're saying is send up a flare, get elders involved to make sure that it's on the radar, don't disappear quietly.
Right.
So that one of the things that Abigail did there, she went and talked to David, and she went and talked to David in a way that her husband would absolutely have hated and forbidden.
Yeah.
And that, like, get help, like basically get help. No, even if your husband doesn't want you to get help, you have to get help.
She paid tribute to not get killed. That is not simply, I'm asking for help to deal with my husband. That's not what that was. It's not the same. It is not asking for elders in the sphere of the church to get involved in the sphere of the family in an inappropriate way. This is a violation of sphere sovereignty. This is what I don't like about a lot of the G3 people who have a very ecclesiocentric view of the church. They give themselves as elders a lot of authority in the daily lives of people. Even to the point, and this is an example of Andy Woodard, who's a pretty discredited pastor, but he was arguing that pastors, and he was a pastor in Manhattan, he was arguing that pastors should have a say in whether a congregant can move or not. So he was arguing that, and this is like saying they're also getting involved in the marriage here in a way that they don't have the authority to do that. They don't have that authority to get involved in a marriage or to encourage a wife to rebel against her husband because he has politically incorrect views. Because that is what they're talking about here. The context for this is politically incorrect views about a very powerful demographic in the United States that is very liberal. Very liberal. So that is what they're talking about here. That is the context. It is not even close to the story in the Bible. In fact, there is a story in the Bible that this is much closer to, but I'm going to let them finish and then we'll get to a more accurate comparison.
And you would say that for friends.
And then she went and told her husband what she'd done.
And you should also say, though, for friends of that woman, that they need to be encouraging her straightforwardly to do that.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly brave both directions because she'd be really brave to go do what she knew would infuriate Nabal. But she's also going to David, who's really mad right now and is on the warpath.
And I think
and
these
she
guys,
like throws herself in front to say, please don't do this.
But also the guys that are doing this kind of thing are being imbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
It's a scary man who's going this way. It takes courage to stand up to a husband.
At least at his keyboard in the dark.
No, for a woman,
a fake name.
For a woman, a husband losing his grip on reality is a terrifying, just scary. So I have a lot of...
We can end on that optimistic note.
Wow.
I'm just going to say from personal experience, noticing has not been a detriment to my marriage at all. Like, at all. Just saying. This is a nonsensical claim by Doug Wilson and friends. Let's get to a Bible comparison that I think actually is what they're advocating. It's much closer to what Doug Wilson is advocating than the Nabal situation. So this is from Esther chapter 1. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, so he's drunk, he commanded Mehuman, Bitha, and a bunch of other eunuchs, so 7 eunuchs, who served in the presence of King Artaxerxes is the better name, I guess, the more known name for this king, Artaxerxes, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. So he wants to see his wife, who's beautiful. He wants to kind of show her off too, which could be vainglorious, but it also is not really bad in and of itself, because she's a queen. This is a royal function of a queen to make a public appearance. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. Then the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. So this is the scene that sets off the entire book of Esther, is the queen refusing a lawful order from her husband. That, this is like a proto-feminist revolt that they are trying to prevent, because all the people are like, what are we going to do about this? If this one wife can get away, if the queen can get away with it, we're going to be in trouble next. Like, our wives are going to rebel against us. So that is what Doug Wilson is fomenting here. And it's wicked, because what is their standard? Seething hatred, which is what he said in like subsequent Twitter post. Seething hatred. It's like, get real. These are not big deals. They're really not. Because first of all, friend-enemy distinction. Second of all, non-Christian religions should be viewed by a Christian with some degree of hostility, and not every religion is as hostile to Christianity as, they're not all on the same level of hostility. Some religions are more hostile than other religions. I don't think your Mormons in Utah are going to be on the same level as, Palestinians. Just saying. There's a friendly example for people who might disagree with me. So anyway, that's all I got to say about that for now. We'll talk more about the Doug Wilson thing later in the week. But that is terrible exegesis out of Doug Wilson. That is an unbiblical example that they're using here. And honestly, you're trying to longhouse husbands into being less based. And that's wrong. So there we go. Have a blessed day. Stay based. Christ is King. And we will catch you on the next one.